Hello, and welcome to the third season of Podcast to Connect, where we are sharing ways for you to grow your audience by looking at your greater media presence and so much more. I am so excited this season to be joined by April from Dorky Podcast. She'll be joining me in just a moment, but I wanted to tell you some information first before we jump into the conversation that I had with her on brand differentiation. Don't worry, I'm going to tell you what that means. This project is available in audio form on all podcast apps, as well as over on YouTube on the Coffee Like Media page. There's a Podcast to Connect playlist there, and you can find all of those links in the show notes or video notes, wherever you are consuming this. We also have a Substack at podcasttoconnect.substack.com, where you can get additional tips and tricks on how you can apply the things we're talking about that April and I are discussing in these episodes directly to your business or community podcast. So, this episode, we are talking about brand differentiation. Don't get caught up on the words. Basically, that means how is the project different than what already is in that space? For example, April from Dorky Podcast. Dorky is a history podcast. Yes, it is. And we spent a fair bit of time trying to tease out how is that history podcast different than all of these others? Because making that clear to your listeners when they're first finding the podcast, when you're introducing it in the introduction, throughout how you create the episodes themselves, how you present it on social media, all through the entire listener journey, that's really important to get, maintain, and engage with the listeners in a way that you want to include them in your community or business podcast. April's is clearly a community podcast, and so we're going to work on that for the next 8 episodes. But first, brand differentiation. How is Dorky different than other history podcasts? All right, let's jump straight into the episode. Hello, April.
Hello, how are you?
I'm really good. I'm excited to see your kitty cat, Harrison, in the background. He's adorable.
Oh,
is it
wait,
he?
it's all backwards. Yes, it's a
Yes.
he.
Okay. He. Okay. Great. Well, let's kick it off today because we have something that we were talking about that while I was hawking your social medias that I think. Oh, there he goes. Goodbye.
Yeah, he's like, wait a minute.
I don't want marketing talk.
It's like, I'm not having any of that.
No, I want to be the attention or I'm out of here. All right. So we were talking about something that I think affects I think a lot of podcasters struggle with, and that's who we talk to when we're posting on social media. But first and foremost, can you tell us your elevator pitch for Dorky Podcast? What's it about?
I'm April, and I'm the host of the Dorky Podcast. That's Dorky, 2 words, door and key. It's a play on the word dorky, and it's a history podcast that talks about anything and everything that I find interesting in history.
About a week ago, you asked me, hey, is there any topic that you'd like me to cover in the podcast or any suggestions? And I gave you a couple and you said that's too modern. And I was like, oh, this feels like a kind of clarification moment on what the podcast covers. So when you say anything that you find interesting, what time periods does that cover or what topics does that cover? Like, can you hone in on that some more?
Sure. It's any period of history. I do set a bit of a boundary that I try not to go past 1970. I try to avoid modern history, and that's because I feel like there's just not been enough time for context, and I just want to avoid all of that business. So if it's past 1970, like I did make an exception and talk about Studio 54.
Yeah.
But and Sally Ride is, but it's anyway.
So it's not just, it's mostly time, but it's not just time. Are there any topics or places or people that you wouldn't cover?
I probably would never do an episode about like JFK's assassination, because you could just talk in circles. about that. And, it would just be me being like, well, it could be this. This makes sense. Oh, it could be this. This makes sense
Mhm.
because there's enough of that. I don't need to add to that. I try to be, non non conspiracy theory, like I don't, I will speculate sometimes, but
Mhm.
I don't get into like super super speculation. So like, the big one I probably would never cover is JFK's assassination.
Right, right. Interesting. I'm trying to think of where, like, other boundaries of things that you wouldn't cover, because I think that would help the podcast description, and also I don't think it would change the tone, because the tone um in your marketing copy is fine, but as far as the elevator pitch or just the description itself, how you talk about it when you're on other podcasts and stuff like that, like giving those parameters, those are the things that makes it more than just a history podcast. That makes it April's history podcast. Do you know what I mean?
Okay. Yeah, I do.
Yeah.
I know
Huh.
that my coverage is not very like deep, deep. I don't really deep dive. Like
Mhm.
if um I probably give, I mean, I'm being generous to myself to say like a 101 version
Yeah.
of the history. It's probably more like high school, but I mean, at the same time, like I told a friend of mine that I was going to start a podcast and that
Mhm.
my first episodes were going to be about Henry VIII's six
Mhm.
wives.
Yeah.
And she looked at me and said, "Oh, was he a polygamist?" And I was, this
Yeah.
this woman is a doctor. Like
Yeah.
she is brilliant. Like that is not a slight on her, but it's just like I don't expect people to
Mhm.
know a lot about what I'm talking about. So I kind of struggle with like how much background to give.
Yeah.
I try to give context, but I don't want to be all background. Yeah,
Yeah.
sorry.
I love that. Well, no, 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 because honestly, the blessing and the curse of modern times is that we have access to so much information. And so for a lot of people, myself included, it feels like an unmanageable task to have a wealth of knowledge on a lot of different historical events.
Yeah,
So it sounds like what you're doing is providing like a base knowledge of super interesting historical events and people.
I
Is that
try.
at all true? Okay.
I'd like to think that. Yeah, I like that.
Huh. No, I don't know. I'm like I said, I'm still trying to tease it out because every time I look at your podcast like episode list, I'm like, every time I think I have a grip on what you wouldn't cover, I see something else and I go, nope. Which is
Yeah,
good. That makes it yours, you know? I mean,
yeah,
that's one of the things. It's just how to describe that.
yeah. And like I said, sometimes it just kind of it's just something that like hits my interest
Mhm,
that particular moment, and I'll write an
mhm,
episode about it. Or like,
mhm,
like I I did an episode about Rasputin, and
mhm,
I ended up making that into three different episodes about three
mhm.
different topics. And I didn't expect that. I just kind of ended up going down this rabbit hole like, what? And I mean, I loved it. It's fascinating, but
Yeah.
I didn't plan on doing three separate episodes on this one topic.
Right. 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 Have you ever sat down and like looked at all of your episodes and tried to find like a common theme? Not just theme, but common topics or common, I don't know.
Um, no, no, not specifically.
Mhm,
I try to talk about things that I find, like I said, interesting, but like
mhm,
also like uplifting or inspiring. I try to be like, okay, well, this is Pride Month, so let's talk
mhm,
about subjects to do with that. I
mhm,
I don't think I want to do that anymore. Like I still
mhm.
want to talk about those subjects and they're important to me,
Yeah.
but I think being that specific about it, like in June, let's do two,
Mm-hmm.
that I've noticed that like the downloads are a little bit less, but also that like it kind of got in the way of my whole Rasputin thing. Like I did
Mm-hmm.
Rasputin and then oh, now it's June, so let's take a break. And then now
Sure.
it's July, so we're going to get back in, which is fine. And I still want to talk about you know,
Mm-hmm.
important topics like that.
Yeah.
I don't want to like, is that a thing? I don't know.
It
Sorry.
is, and on a lot of levels, I think that's more of like it's good that we have months that celebrate certain populations or events or things that happen that are really important to keep in mind. But
Yes.
I think doing it outside of those times is almost more important because you're keeping the conversation going. It's not just we celebrate
Yes.
it here and then it's who cares the rest of the year, you know?
I agree. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that's clever. Like following your curiosity and wanting to do it when it makes sense for your what research you want to do and what information you want to share with people so they have that base of knowledge, I think is a really powerful thing to realize. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, it's weird that the downloads went down. Oh, but it's also summer.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
yeah, there is that. But yeah.
Well, I don't know if they've gone down, but it's like I guess I would expect more downloads
Hmm.
for like Black History Month,
Right.
you know. And poor George Washington Carver. That broke my heart.
Yeah, it's always the ones you think that are going to do better, that the episodes that you think, not the people that don't, that you're like, wait, but I thought that was a shoo-in. I thought that was definitely going to be something. And then ones that you don't think are the ones that are really popular and you're like, what just happened?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like I just pulled that one out of nowhere just to make sure I was, had something going because I'm feeling kind of burnt out. And then boom, suddenly there's all these downloads. Like, what the heck? Yeah, 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 yeah. So is the question then is if it's not a specific content area or time period, the question then becomes who is April?
Oh.
Because if you are the lens that everything comes through. But I haven't listened to all of your episodes, I admit it. There's a lot of them.
Yeah. And some of them are just random topics.
Yeah.
And yeah. So I don't blame you and don't feel bad.
I don't. I have limited listening time. We all do. That's part of the thing. But that begs the question of podcast is based on your interests, but we don't know much about you, should we? And by we, I mean the listeners. Because do you ever talk about yourself in the podcast?
Um, not not really. I kind
Yeah.
of hinted in the Edgar Allan Poe episode that I
Yeah.
might have been like a combat boot wearing clove cigarette smoking teenager.
This is why we get along.
And like
Same.
I kind of purposely try to keep that stuff,
Yeah.
because I I guess I feel like people don't listen to hear about
Hmm.
me. They
Hmm.
want to learn about whatever I'm talking, and so like
Hmm.
I I don't know. I guess I feel like me being like this is a subject I'm interested in.
Let's connect this to your social media posts. When you're posting the social media stuff, you do connect it to you. When you ask the questions, you've been sharing stuff from like your earlier life and things, so you do connect it to you there.
I I just started to
Ah,
because of what you've taught me. And
yeah.
yeah, so
Huh.
I've just started to like with the blog. It really helped, like I do tend to share more personal. I try not to be personal on like LinkedIn because I
Uh-huh.
feel like that's supposed to be professional.
Yeah, LinkedIn is definitely not a share your lunch kind of place,
Right.
but there is a personal tone to it, especially when you're talking about a passion project like yours. where you are the project. Your research, your curiosity is the project. That is seems like the deciding factor on what episodes get made. Is it's what interests you and how far down the rabbit hole you want to go.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So is it that you don't feel comfortable sharing at least just a little bit about why you're interested in a topic before you start deep diving on it in the episode, or that you don't think they would want to know?
It would be more that I don't think that they would, not that they don't wouldn't want to know, but
Mhm,
just that like maybe being too personal might
mhm,
be like not appreciated. Like,
mhm,
okay, yeah. Who cares? Let's get back, that's why I would always be like, oh, side note, because I would want people
mhm,
to know, like, yeah, I'm gonna veer off, but
mhm.
it's for a very short time and I'm aware I'm doing it and boom, I'm back. Like, does that make sense?
This is fascinating. Yes, because I personally find your side notes, which we've now taken off that
Yes.
disclaimer of side note, I find those the most hilarious because that's like getting the information is one thing, but processing it, thinking about it, relating it to current day life, which is what you do in your side notes, I
Yeah.
find that part awesome. It's not just knowledge, but it's like applied knowledge through a person.
Okay.
Yeah. So
Thank you. Yeah.
but I'm not your ideal audience. Like I said, I didn't listen to a lot of history podcasts before this. So I'm kind of curious. There's a history podcast that you recommended to me last week. Oh, what was the name of that one? It was by a woman.
Vulgar
Mm,
history?
yes, that one.
Yes.
Does she ever pull herself in, or is it just information about the topic?
It's about like 90%
Mhm,
information and like 10% personal. So like
mhm,
she'll mention her cat
mhm. Oh,
and or like tie something to like a Taylor Swift song. I mean,
yeah.
whatever, but it's like just enough personal, but she's not like, "Oh, well, back when I was 10, da da da,"
Mhm,
which
mhm.
I I wouldn't want to do that either, so I don't blame her. But it's a good it's a good mix, I think.
Okay, okay. What's the most current episode right now? Boom, 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 boom.
I believe it's Sally
Yeah,
Hemings.
it is Sally Ride, yeah. So what just out of curiosity, what was the reason why you chose that episode? Like, what made you fascinated with her story?
I chose Sally Ride because honestly, I wanted to do something for Pride Month,
Mhm,
and there isn't a lot of historically what I think is historically
mhm,
uplifting
mhm,
Pride stories. A lot of those stories are sad to me. Like,
mhm.
I've had people ask me to talk
Yeah,
about Ellen Turing, and I'm like, yes, but oh boy, you
yeah,
know. And so I picked Sally Ride because I've always admired her as the first woman astronaut. I've
yeah.
always looked up to her. She inspires me, and the fact that she is part of that community was like
Mhm,
perfect. This it's a
mhm,
good it's a good way to talk about her and
mhm,
also uplift this community that I think should have inspiring, uplifting stories.
mhm, mhm.
Like,
See, I find
does that
that
make sense?
fascinating.
Oh,
I That's the kind of thing at the beginning of a podcast that would make me go, "Ah, oh, cool, I wanna hear this because now I've got the context of why the episode exists, why the information is is interesting to the person that's going to be telling it to me."
okay.
I don't know. That's just me. It is completely your comfort zone, and I understand feeling more comfortable sharing personal information in some mediums versus others. I completely
Yeah.
understand that. But know that podcasts are very personal even when they're factual, and tidbits of stuff about the host, because the host, it's a personality medium. And if people
Yeah.
are listening to you, as long as you don't ramble on about what you had for lunch and things that are really, really disconnected in a very bizarre way, although some people do get away with that. But in general, if you don't do that and you stick to what you're talking about, but connect it to yourself, especially
Yeah.
at the beginning to set the context,
Okay.
I think people might like it. I don't know, but it is completely your comfort zone.
No, I think that makes sense, and I like that. I do.
Mhm.
And I'm gonna work on that to add that in
Cool
because
beans.
I think it's a good point.
Yeah. And if it doesn't work and you get lots of hate mail, then you can tell them to send them my way. I'll deal with them. But they won't because they're already listening to you.
This is another reason I picked history was that I was like, oh boy, if I do get like angry emails,
Mm,
it would be a lot of like, well, actually, and like I'm okay with that. Those make sense. I can't be offended if
yeah.
I got a year wrong or mispronounced something and
Mhm.
someone corrects me. But, you know, it's
Yeah.
I can deal with the well actuallys.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Nah, nah. I doubt that would be the thing that would break people.
Yeah. No.
Yeah. They wouldn't be listening in the first place if they weren't invested. Thank you so much for joining us with this trip down brand differentiation lane, which is easier to write than to say. Remember you can get more tips at podcasttoconnect.substack.com. That is our Substack. It is completely free and it has different tips and tricks that you can use this information in this episode to help your podcast grow in the right way, to have the right people in your network, in your community, in your business, and so on and so forth. Podcasttoconnect.substack.com. Hope to see you there. We'll be back in 2 weeks. Remember, you can get more tips at podcasttoconnect.substack.com. That is our Substack. It is completely free and it has different tips and tricks that you can use this information in this episode to help your podcast grow in the right way, to have the right people in your network, in your community, in your business, and so on and so forth. Podcasttoconnect.substack.com. Hope to see you there.